Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the webinar. Hope you got on all right. My name is Shawn Morford. I'm the Executive Director of the Network of Oregon Watershed Councils, and I'm here in Salem, and there's a few joining us on this webinar this morning. So some folks are on phone and some are on video, so you'll get a chance to meet them in just a second. So this webinar is part of a monthly series that we do for conservation districts, land trusts, and watershed councils, and it looks like from the list we have quite a few other folks that are joining us, and you're always welcome to do these. They're free. We're sponsored by OWEB, but we also are pleased to add this year a new corporate sponsor, that Pacific Corrugated Pipe. PCP has become a contributor to the webinar series, and we're really grateful for their participation. You may know their operations are in Eugene. I had a chance to meet their sales staff. They're awesome people. They do quite a bit of the pipe and the fitting and the accessories that are used in the work that we do. So we're really happy to have them as part of the team. Looks like about 41 folks registered for this morning. We do post the recordings of these webinars on the Network of Oregon Watershed Council's website. So let others know that have missed today that they can take a look at it on our website. In a minute, I'm going to hand it over to Derek Godwin, who is the Watershed Management faculty member with OSU Extension. I think you're there in Corvallis, if I'm not mistaken, Derek. And he's going to introduce a couple of municipal colleagues that he works with that are going to share sort of their story and give us some ideas of how to interact with them. Just a couple of housekeeping things. Everybody is muted by default, but if you have a question, you can either type it in the question box or you can raise your little icon hand, and that will show me as the moderator that you want to be unmuted and you can make your comment. I think that for Derek's presentation, we're going to hold the questions until a certain point, and when he gives me the go-ahead to ask the questions, I'll ask them on your behalf. There is a handout that you can download that has a list of resources that if you want to follow up with more information on low impact development. I believe that's also Derek's last slide, so you'll get a chance to see what that handout would look like on that. The next webinar is scheduled for, we do these every third Thursday and more, but at least every third Thursday of the month. And the one for February was going to be Chris Jordan from NOAA talking about beavers and beaver analog, but we haven't been able to confirm with Chris whether or not he's going to be able to do this because he's on furlough. So stay tuned. We do send out information on the upcoming webinars. We hope that Chris will join us. If he doesn't, we know we have some other topics that we'll bring in. If you have an idea for a future webinar that you would like to have, if you want to have it as a discussion time, or if you want to hear some experts talking about some topic that you'd like more information on, please fill out the survey at the end and let us know what those ideas are. Last item is, instead of paying a registration fee for this webinar, your tuition fee for this is to fill out the survey at the end. This is really important for us as we tell our funders the difference that these webinars make for you. So in order for us to continue selling the idea of doing these webinars to our funders, we need to have evidence that says these really do help. So please take a minute at the end. There's just a few questions and fill it out. Okay, I'm going to hand it over to Derek. Derek, thank you so much for saying yes to this. I know, at least on the Watershed Council side, there are quite a few folks beginning to go down this road looking for partnerships with municipalities. I know that there's a few watershed councils including low impact development in their strategic plans. So with the big turnout we've had this morning, I know this is a topic of interest. So thanks for saying yes to doing this, and I'm going to hand it over to you.
All right, great. Thank you very much. And can you hear me okay? Is everything volume coming in all right?
Beautiful.
All right, excellent. Well, great. Well, thanks. Welcome, everyone. I have not taught webinars very much in the past, so this is a little bit nervous here, but we'll see how it goes. But as Sean said, really, um, the idea here is to share a little bit about low impact development and green infrastructure, and really to inspire and give you some ideas of how to be involved with your local jurisdictions, whether it be cities or counties or whomever the various entities might be, to do some of this work. So hopefully you'll be a little bit inspired this morning. So yes, getting started, we will have two people joining us later on in the discussion. Elizabeth Sagmiller, Environmental and Technical Division Manager at the City of Kaiser, and Therese Walsh, Water Resources Manager at the City of Eugene. All right,
hi,
so let's get started. Yeah, so getting started, wanted to first just give you a little bit of background to make sure we're all on the same page as far as impacts of development on water quality and watersheds, and then go through what some of these practices are. And so it may be a little bit basic for many of you, but it's just to make sure we kind of are all talking the same language here. And so beginning, as we think about watersheds before development, that we tend to have, most of the water, snow, precipitation that falls on the surfaces is really absorbed into the ground and moving into shallow groundwater, going to a local stream or river or lake or some kind of water body, or into deep water. But as we add more impervious surfaces to these areas and we develop, we generally have water that whenever it's there, it tends to fall off more quickly. And oftentimes, at least back in the old days, the idea was to get water off property as quickly as possible. And so many of the water routing that's still there today goes straight into a storm drain, which then goes directly to stream, lake, ocean, whatever kind of water body is there. So with watersheds after development, there tends to be an increase in surface runoff and that quicker delivery in order to get to streams. So not only do you have some quicker delivery, but you could also have some higher peak flows from that. Some other effects would be a decrease in groundwater or decrease of the amount of flow that goes subsurface, again, affecting the timing and amount. And also a little change in the evaporation and transpiration, actually more of the transpiration, dealing with less vegetation in the watersheds. So what are some of the impacts? Well, one area of impacts can be related to water quantity. So this would be examples of flooding. Could also be erosion of, as I mentioned, the increased amount of flows and quicker runoff could cause erosion, as well as the general aggradation and degradation of streams as they try to adjust to that. So these two pictures, one picture on the left is from a Tillamook area in Tillamook, and then the other one is actually a stream that does have a forested buffer on it, but it is an urban stream that has been degraded, eroded down in the stream bed, and is trying to handle that increased amount of flow. In terms of stormwater pollutants, there are many that these processes could then end up going straight to our water bodies, whether they be suspended solids and sediments, nutrients like nitrogen and phosphorus, fertilizers that we may add, metals. I know in the Willamette Valley, mercury has become a increased concern, metal of increased concern. Oils and grease, bacteria, of course, pesticides and herbicides, things that may be applied that are not filtered out. And then the other thing could be increased temperature, and whether we're not like some other parts of the United States where we get a lot of rain in the summer, but we could have changes in the stream channels, and so that it causes an increase in temperature in our summertime, as well as some summer flows. If we have summer storms that run off of hot pavement and is not filtered, then could have increased temperature. And then, of course, impacts to fish and wildlife, whether it be changes in species diversity and abundance, changes in physical structures to their habitat, a number of other impacts to fish and wildlife. So really and we're not going to stop development. We're going to continue to grow and increase our populations. And so really it becomes more of a question of how can we manage our development to mimic natural systems. And a way of doing that is to integrate our land use plans, our regulations and management practices to better protect our streams and wildlife and drinking water and quality. The other part is to reduce infrastructure costs, and also to they have the amenities as well to make our communities more attractive. So that's what really, if you think about it as a goal. So talking about terminology, so I've been using the low impact development term, and this one I use the Puget Sound Partnership definition, and highlighted here that it's really a stormwater and land use management strategy that strives to mimic pre-disturbance hydrologic processes. And that, of course, includes a variety of things, as I mentioned, whether it be planning or be the specific techniques or stormwater facilities and those kind of practices. The other thing I want to point out is sometimes, low impact development, the term is used differently at different places of the United States in different areas. And so that's why I like the Puget Sound one as one that I use. The other term that's becoming increasingly more popular is green infrastructure. And there's a few different definitions out there. And the one that I use and like is the one from EPA. And that's because it's more inclusive and it involves many different types of aspects. And so I consider, for me personally, I use low impact development and green infrastructure interchangeably. But as I highlighted here, it's the vegetation, soils, and other elements and practices that restore some of the natural processes required to manage water and create healthier urban environments. And so if anything, green infrastructure is really more of a broader term than low impact development. So what are the types of projects or applications that we think of whenever we mention these terms? So one would be swales and rain gardens, a variety of places that are represented here, both in Western Oregon and Central and Eastern Oregon. They're being used on an increasing basis. And the idea of these, of course, is that you're trying to capture the water runoff, store it for a period of time, have it be filtered and sort of naturally cleaned before it either continues to run off into another kind of area, predetermined area, or it's just soaking into the ground. So the next one, we kind of think of green streets as a combination of practices, being urban trees and urban forest, as well as these swales and rain gardens. So here you see kind of a variety of examples. And some people also with green streets include the pervious types of services. So in here, actually, this one's actually not pervious. There's the inlet there. But anyway, whenever people think of green streets, they may also be talking about pervious concrete and asphalt and things. Another type of practice, which is really, I find it much more common in Washington with their soils, but soil amendments. So using, amending soils and new developments so that they can absorb as much water as possible and decrease the amount of runoff. As you can imagine from early developments, oftentimes the last thing that is thought about is trying to save that native soil and trying to keep that natural hydrologic capacity available there. So anyway, so these are some examples of soil amendment that's happening. And then also pervious surfaces, a few different examples, everything from this porous asphalt here in Pringle Creek, Salem, Oregon, as well as concrete and the various types of other applications, the reinforced turf in parking areas that could be used, as well as the different tiles and other types of services. For some reason, I'm not thinking of this term, but in any case, those are the various types of practices that we show. And then also green roofs, you know, often people think is that if we're really going to change the impacts of this development, we also have to decrease the amount of water that we manage. And green roofs help with that, not only slowing down the timing piece, but also trying to increase the amount of transpiration and the amount of water that goes back into the atmosphere from built environments. And of course, there's other benefits to green roofs as well from an energy standpoint. So oftentimes whenever people think of low impact development and sometimes green infrastructure, they're just focused on those types of facilities. But really, whenever you're considering these types of approaches, you want to start at the beginning stage as possible. And so incorporating these practices into master planning and site design is really the first step. And again, that's trying to decrease the amount of water that's runs off or that has to be managed or treated in some way. So this is kind of an old picture here, but it's an example of a conservation-oriented neighborhood on the left versus the typical subdivision to where a lot of the vegetation is removed. And in these conservation areas, not only are they trying to decrease the amount of impervious surfaces, but they're clustering units and having more open space that becomes common area. And of course, identifying the various types of trees and having the minimum disturbance as possible on the sites. So this example was done up in Washington, up in the Seattle area, Puget Sound area. It's called Kensington Estates, and what they looked at is two different types of plans, one in a more incorporating low impact development practices, and the other example, which I'm not showing here, but was more the traditional development. And so what they did was they applied these principles and essentially ended up with the amount of impervious area that is having water runoff that goes into a pipe or a storm drain and being managed is essentially reduced down to 0%. That's a term, effective impervious area would be the amount of impervious area that is connected to a storm drain and has to be managed. So anyway, so their experience was they incorporated this and not only reduced the amount of water that's managed and increase the open space, but it also ended up saving them money and became more economical in terms of infrastructure, really, primarily. And so you think of green infrastructure, low impact development, there's really a variety of scales that relate to this type of work. Whether you're looking at the individual building or lot scale, that just site specific types of applications, or whether you're incorporating a neighborhood or more kind of development plan that is incorporating these, up to more the municipal or county scale. How do we manage the water and how do we manage these infrastructure on a bigger, more watershed scale type basis? And then of course at the larger watershed scale, also being a factor there. So really incorporating all of these concepts at the different scales and understanding and planning how it all integrates together, and using these practices in each of those examples. So again, green infrastructure and low impact development practices apply to all 4 phases of the project. So one piece that's often missed is at the master planning stage and having the several different types of experts coming together to provide input on that. Of course, the design and construction, but the other one that's often missed is the maintenance and how do we plan for that long-term maintenance. This is obviously different than regular streets and sidewalks and impervious areas and that type of maintenance. So how do we plan for this? What are the different types of practices? How do we train people and make sure that we think about that or plan through all those stages? So yeah, and also with green infrastructure, it's more than just environmental benefits, right? And so there's many examples that using these practices have not only been economic, but has also helped them on the social side and social health side, the individual and community's well-being. And then even now, I think some of the areas that have been doing these types of work, they're really thinking of it in terms of a social equity lens too, and how that gets integrated into the planning to make sure that these types of developments and practices are going in all places and providing access for people of all different incomes and areas to these green spaces. All right, so that was a pretty quick overview. So I'm going to pause there, and actually can't see the questions on my screen. I'm not smart enough to figure this out yet. But does folks have any questions or things that are unclear?
Yeah, so Derek, this is Sean. You've got a question. Somebody wants to have me unmute them, which I'll do in just a second, and then I do have one written question that I'll read after that. So Neil, I'm going to go ahead and unmute you and let you ask your question. I think you're unmuted. Go ahead.
Thank you. Neil Schulman, North Clackamas Urban Watersheds Council. We have kind of recently gone through a couple of processes with developers where we've been encouraging to adopt more LID elements into their projects. And the process issue that we've encountered is by the time it gets to land use and we are aware of it, they have already gone far enough down the design road that they have pretty invested in that and don't want to step back with their consultants and say, oh, gee, there's a different way we could structure our parking lot, or we're going to redo our design to have a smaller footprint. You know, they're already have put lots of time and money into that process. And I was wondering if you or any other of the folks on the call have had any success at being able to insert yourself into things like pre-design conferences earlier in the process so that we're not just having these conversations after the horse is already out of the barn.
Yeah, absolutely. So a couple of examples, and then maybe Elizabeth and Therese or other folks can certainly pipe in. So I think you have it right, is the earlier the better that you can possibly have these conversations. You know, and one thing is to think about what incentives that you can put in place so that these developers are thinking about these really early on in the process. Oftentimes cities will create a kind of quicker and easier path through the permit process so that it gets developers' attention and they realize that, oh, if we're considering these things, then it actually will be cheaper because it's less time and money spent on designs up front. The other part is that I've worked quite a bit with Maria Cahill over the years. She's a consultant, and she has put together different design charrette type of conversations where you get early on in the thinking stage and have folks with different technical expertise come in and provide input. And so it's slower. My conversations with her is that it tends to be slower in the beginning, but it ends up speeding up further down the line and actually ends up being economic. But Elizabeth, Therese, any other thoughts on that you would like to add?
I have some thoughts I could share, but Elizabeth, do you have anything that you wanted to say? Are you there? I could just tell you a little bit about, answer that question from the City of Eugene's perspective with the caveat that I'm not directly involved in our development review, but I do have recent experience. Well, I have historical experience with the adoption of the City of Eugene Stormwater Development Standards, which we did originally in 2006, and we required on-site treatment, capture and treatment of stormwater runoff for all development, but we had an open palette of BMPs, open palette of the types of facilities that a developer could choose to use. And then in 2014, I think we changed it to incorporate a hierarchy to require the consideration of green infrastructure first. And we also put into code provisions that required a review at the land use application stage, whereas originally we just had review at the building permit stage. So that pushed the review further up into the design process, which I think has resulted in more green infrastructure. And then even before the land use review stage, we have an optional consultation that a developer could take advantage of. And I would suggest that if you do something like that, notes are really good, because there's a lot of stuff that's talked about. And I have recent experience with something where the developer didn't think that they were made aware of something that we think we made them aware of, and it's directly related to the issue that your question is centered around. So codify, provide pre-land use review consultation. I suggest notes, and just think of ways that you can get, like you're saying, insert yourself early on into the process and document the conversation. I hope that helps.
This is Elizabeth. I'm sorry, I was on mute, so I was trying to talk. Did you have other thoughts, Therese?
I'm done, Elizabeth. Thank you.
Okay. Neil, this is Elizabeth from the City of Kaiser. We're obviously a smaller agency than Eugene is, but a lot of what Therese has said applies to the City of Kaiser as well. So currently our standards require that any infill, any development in town retains stormwater on site, and that's just in code. It's addressed at the planning stage. I'll just say, be patient as you go through working with builders and developers. They're becoming more and more familiar with these regulations and techniques, but they sometimes need a little bit of hand holding. And it took us probably a good 3 years to get folks just used to knowing that they were going to have to retain stormwater on site.
So there's quite a few more questions that have popped in. I want to just share with you what they are, and so you can respond at whatever length you want. So the first comment was, developers who are concerned primarily with the bottom line have little incentive to employ additional costly green infrastructure development. Ideas for developer incentives is one of the questions. Let me just add a couple more questions and maybe you can answer them together. What considerations are being made when we consider new developments trying to reduce disturbance to native vegetation while considering fire danger? Are there recommendations to achieve a balance? And then I do have one more person who wants to be unmuted. And Neil, maybe if you don't want to be called on again, I'll just ask you to take your hand down. And Claire, I'll call on you in just a second. Go ahead, Derek. It's all yours.
Well, I think starting first, the bottom line. As I'm going to say here in a minute, and I'll just give you a preview, is that I think for one, is that there's an assumption that all of these practices are more expensive, and that's just not always the case. As a matter of fact, there are many cases where they are cheaper, and we've done research and examples where that is. It's not the same everywhere, and so we don't like to talk about, well, this is the cost and the specific savings, because that's just, everything is site specific. But I would say that there are a number of ways for incentives, and the ones that I'm most familiar with relate to reducing the amount of time through the permit process. That's been one. And then the other one would be, or actually there are several more. The other ones are having a number of designs that are already templates, so that they can look at these and easily get through them, because oftentimes a barrier is just maybe not really knowing all the options. And then a third one is that actually many of these communities have been found to bring higher real estate values. So those are a couple of ideas, but again, Elizabeth, Therese, you guys are more on the ground. Do you have any specific examples of ideas for developer incentives?
I'll jump in first on this one, Therese. This depends on where your what the soil types are, but one of the options that we give developers in this area is to use a UIC, and so you have the benefit of infiltrating the water and using soil to treat it without necessarily having a whole lot of regulations tied up in vegetation, and that's kind of the thing that makes some developers uncomfortable. So in Kaiser, if we have a developer that has real heartburn with using some of their property to put in a roadside swale, for instance, if they have adequate infiltration rates, then they can install a UIC and be covered under the city's permit. Now, there's a different situation in Eugene, and Therese has a different take on that, but that works for us, and it will work in a lot of areas in Oregon. And for those of you that don't know, a UIC is an underground injection control device, commonly known as a dry well.
So I can complement what you said there, Elizabeth, in that incentives are actually really interesting and challenging to come up with. So it's a good question, and I don't have a real good succinct answer, but I can give you a couple of things that reflect our experiences in Eugene. One is that we do have an out, in a way, for a developer who cannot accommodate a vegetated facility on the site, and we do have specific code criteria that they'd need to meet to prove that. And if they meet that criteria, they can pay what we call an off-site low-impact development SDC mitigation fee, which we have collected more revenue from that than we anticipated by quite a large amount. And so now we're reflecting on whether we inadvertently created too big of a loophole, in a way, for developers to basically pay this additional SDC fee so that they could basically not need to do vegetative facilities on site. So we're kind of looking at what's going on here. So the financial incentive isn't the only incentive. I think streamlining the review and approval process is also an incentive, and so paying an off-site fee will streamline that process for a developer, and that's worth some amount of money, apparently, because we're collecting that money. The other thing is that we have a systems development charge that all new development pays into for stormwater, and then we have an ongoing stormwater user fee that property owners pay over time. And we have, within those fee methodology structures, we have some reductions for even meeting the water quality requirements and exceeding the water quality requirements. So there again, you kind of have to think through what's going to motivate the developer to do it. It's not going to be the user fee that the property owner pays and those associated incentives, but to the degree that you have some incentives within the SDC fee methodology, that may help as well. And then the other thing is just making the requirements as clear as possible and providing standard design drawings and things like that. I think the design development community appreciates that because time is money and certainty is advantageous.
So Derek,
excellent. So
you've got quite a few more questions. I was going to say, I would suggest to everybody who's asked a question, I will make sure that the presenters get these questions, and you've included your name, or I have access to your name with the question, so we can make sure that we correspond with you after the call. Is that okay? I haven't asked the presenters that, but is that okay?
Yeah.
You've obviously
we've
some good discussion here.
Yeah, absolutely. We have our names and contact information after this. And so I'm going to keep moving along, but if you'll continue to wrangle the questions and we'll get through it. I only have a couple more slides and there will continue to be discussion. So I just put up this slide, and we did we looked at 3 different size communities, and we wanted to learn about the barriers and opportunities for low impact development. This was back in the mid 2000s, and the publication is still available. It's a little bit outdated, but it basically kind of lists a number of different things. But the summary here is that each community and ecosystem is different. And so the more that you can get to know that, and then also, as we're kind of talking here, what are the drivers that determine decision making? This is really where you have to get in and know your area, and like these questions are coming up. Well, what about the developer incentives, or what about the codes, or what about we have soils that don't infiltrate very well, or steep slopes, or there's a lot of things, or even just we're not really interested in this, and then who are those decision makers, and who do you need to be talking to? So anyway, so drivers. And then the last, of course, is designing these systems to fit your local ecosystem, as well as economic and, in some cases, your social health issues. So there's many reasons why cities and counties are getting involved in low impact development and green infrastructure. One key one is that they all need the MPDES permits, non-point source pollution discharge elimination system permits. And the phase 1 and 2 relates to when these cities were required, and the phase 1 with the larger cities, typically 100,000 plus population, or having I forget the actual density amount, but anyway, they were had to have permits first, and then the smaller communities came in a second round, phase 2, and then now in beyond would be the smaller communities that are having increased attention from DEQ and being requested to think about and integrate these practices. Another one is all communities, all watersheds pretty much have to address some kind of water quality issues, and so there are these TMDLs, total maximum daily load plans. And in these plans, DEQ has integrated the use of LID, green infrastructure type practices. Another one is that there are some communities that have a combined sewer stormwater system. Thank God not everyone is like Portland, the city of Portland. But there are a number of systems, and this one is particularly a strong driver for some, even some of the smaller cities. Flooding. So I've been involved with some of the smaller cities that came to the table around low impact development due to flooding and not having the infrastructure available, that as areas were developed, they weren't able to handle the increased runoff. And so they became much more interested in using these practices. Another one is just economics. That could be a driver. And in some cases, these real estate values may be higher, but then also trying to balance that out with the costs to implement. Technical capacity was often mentioned as a barrier, not only in terms of design, having understanding the types of designs and options for the local ecosystem, but also on the maintenance side, and being able to understand how best to do the maintenance and to have people trained and to do that. And then another one is stakeholder support. So cities, counties, there's a number of stakeholders that whenever they become interested and supportive, then they can really be drivers. So, and then finally, there's a lot of barriers that are just plain perceived and not real, but whether they're perceived or not, they're still barriers, and it takes time to work through them. So I'm going to pause there and ask Elizabeth and then Therese to provide some examples of what are their most common drivers and barriers that they've come up against.
Okay, so again, this is Elizabeth from the City of Kaiser. We are a Phase 2 agency. We're just north of the City of Salem, and we actually share an urban growth boundary with Salem. One of the most important drivers for us is that all things regulatory, like Derek mentioned, TMDLs, the NPDES permit. We do have a separate system here, so all of our piped stormwater goes directly to local waterways. And then I mentioned our use of UICs, and we do have a water pollution control facilities permit that covers the publicly owned UICs in our area, and we use those. So those things were what really got us started in doing LID. But we started it probably earlier than a lot of Phase 2 communities. And I think that the reason that we were able to do that was because we're used to putting water in the ground in a UIC. Developing a vegetated facility was something, just a different way to put water back into the ground. So we started experimenting with this shortly after 2009, and our first permit was issued in 2007. For the City of Kaiser, barriers really for us are primarily we have a very conservative resident base, and their aesthetic preference is for manicured lawns, street trees, lawns in the right-of-way, things along those lines. So that's become a little bit of a barrier to help folks understand that more of a rain garden feature. We call them vegetated stormwater facilities in Kaiser. Those roadside vegetated swales are really providing multiple benefits, both as a way of saving money, as Derek mentioned, but adding to our environmental elements. And then we also incorporate rock galleries in the base of all of our VSFs. And it's something that the residents don't see, but helping them to understand that those facilities are a way to address flooding issues that you don't see in a typical type situation or a MS4 situation. Kaiser is pretty much built out, and so there's not a lot of room here for above ground detention type of facilities when there are high water events. And so having those rock galleries has the ability to hold a lot of water and let it infiltrate naturally. And one of the other barriers that has come up recently for us is that some of our state land use regulations are often at odds with LID, and our regulations under our permits are saying that we need more green infrastructure, but land use laws are saying we'll build denser and cluster everything together, which a lot of times ends up with more impervious surface. So those are just a few things that we deal with here at the City of Kaiser.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Therese?
Sure. So the drivers that I reflect on for the city of Eugene precede my time at the city, and I've been here a long time. But I would say back in the mid-1990s, facing the discovery of wetlands in West Eugene, as well as the imminent issuance of our Phase 1 NPDES permit under the Clean Water Act. And I don't know if you mentioned this, Derek, or not, but for anyone who's not familiar, that permit regulates the discharge of stormwater into the receiving streams and requires a whole host of things to happen to minimize the pollutants in that stormwater discharge that goes into, in our case, the Willamette River and Amazon Creek. So imminent permit and the discovery of wetlands is what led our city visionaries at the time, or really metro area visionaries, to propose new policy to our city council, which was adopted in 1993. And that new policy basically redirected how we manage stormwater from a sole focus on flood control and conveyance to a more multiple objective way of managing stormwater, including recognizing the valuable functions of the natural infrastructure and incorporating those more formally into the stormwater management system. So kind of a big picture recognition of the value of the natural systems. I don't even think we used that term low impact development or green infrastructure at the time, but conceptually that was, the stage was set for that. And then just a couple other things real quick. We did in this, another driver, Elizabeth reminded me about the underground injection controls or dry wells. The city of Eugene also has public dry wells that receive stormwater and direct it into the ground. Those are regulated under the Safe Drinking Water Act. We also have a WPCF permit that Elizabeth mentioned the city of Kaiser has, a water pollution control facilities permit. By policy, the city of Eugene decided to decommission all of our public dry wells, and we're doing that systematically year to year with some of our stormwater capital money, and we're doing that mostly by retrofitting the system and incorporating green infrastructure facilities. So where we used to have a dry well and the water went straight to groundwater, now we have vegetated facilities that provide surface infiltration for that stormwater runoff, still direct it some to groundwater, but then we also have a connection to a surface or a stormwater system that takes it to surface water. So the Safe Drinking Water Act dry well permits were another driver for the city of Eugene, a more recent driver. And then lastly, I'll just mention that in 2008, the city did I'll hold it up, a review of low impact development practices for stormwater management. And this was actually a requirement in our stormwater permit to do a review of our practices to identify barriers to implementing low impact development and opportunities to implement low impact development. So we identified a whole range of things, relatively small things like vegetation screening for traffic was sort of in conflict with our stormwater design or stormwater facility design standards. So we were able to work out some of these relatively easy barriers. But then we similarly had more difficult barriers, like Elizabeth mentioned, that sort of conflict between densification to hold the line on your urban growth boundary versus low impact development, which can require more land area to implement. So there is tension between the two, and you just have to resolve that by policy within your organization. It's not an easy thing to do, but it's something that I think we're all doing in one way or another.
That's great, Therese. And due to time, what I just want to cover is this last slide, and then we can try to wrap around with any type of questions. So I'm hoping that everyone is getting an idea of the various types of examples, are the number of details that go into each of the communities, and getting some ideas of how you could get started in helping. So one of the things that these are kind of my top few here. One is to start having conversations with your local government and trying to understand what drivers are affecting these land management decisions. You can see just by visiting with Elizabeth and Therese how each community is different. Find champions, inform a planning committee to explore opportunities. I've seen this work really well in various places. So that's a good step. Another one is we've had some luck with hosting an event to raise awareness. So in some cases where, in particular the smaller cities that may not be as used to these terms and these ideas, you can host an event and raise awareness and excitement and getting some volunteers going. Another part of how you could help with local communities is help with training the local workforce, training volunteers, become integrated with your cities and counties to kind of all on the same page and providing different efforts there that complement each other. In some cases, I may be able to help with design ideas. The cities and counties don't always have the capacity, the number of technical experts, on staff, and so being able to help with some of these would be great. And then also finally, working together to seek grants and assistance based on priority projects. So with this in mind, Elizabeth and then Therese, any quick examples of how councils or SWCDs or land trusts have helped you in meeting your priorities?
Yeah, I want to talk just short bit here about a group that we have locally called the Mid-Willamette Outreach Group. This is a group of representatives from about 4 municipalities, 1 county, and soil and water conservation districts. We originally put this group together just to be able to share resources and provide consistent messaging across regional boundaries. That group's been together since 2011, and it's really been very useful in helping to make changes within our own organizations, but also in joining forces to provide outreach and technical resources to folks that are interested in doing these types of activities in and around their community. So for a smaller agency, we don't have a lot of resources, so it really, you get a lot of bang for your buck by joining together and sharing your strengths. And then the other thing that I just wanted to mention, that as you go forth and you start to work with local municipalities, just carefully plan, be committed, and be flexible. We love to have people that are interested from the community step in and want more information on these things. But a lot of times, we have lots of other balls to juggle, so it's always great when folks are flexible and realistic on timing.
Excellent. Thank you. Therese, do you have some things to add?
Yes, I don't know if anyone is on the line attending the webinar from the Longtime Watershed Council, and if so, they might be able to speak to this as well. But the City of Eugene and the Longtime Watershed Council have a very long-standing and effective partnership. And in about 2010-ish, I think, the Longtime approached the city with an interest in helping to address some of the stormwater problems within the City of Eugene. Even though we have a stormwater program, there's more work than there are resources to do. And so we went through kind of a back and forth process of niche finding, I'll call it, and identified an area where the Longtime has been really effective in helping to complement the City of Eugene's program. And that is specifically that we support and they lead a pilot program, I'll call it, to work with private property owners who are interested in retrofitting their building or their site to incorporate low-impact development designs on their property. So they're not required to do it by city code, but they might want to do it. They could be looking for a reduction on their stormwater user fees. They could be just wanting to do the right thing environmentally. Whatever their motivation is, the Longtime has been a great go-to organization for interested property owners. And then the city has helped the Watershed Council learn our permit review processes. We support them financially, modestly, but we do give them some money to match the cost of constructing these facilities. And the Longtime Watershed Council takes on the responsibility to ensure that the facilities are maintained. So it's been a really good partnership, and I'd be happy to share more about that with anyone who's interested, or you can also talk to Sarah Whitney with the Longtime Watershed Council.
Excellent. So I'm afraid that we have talked a lot. All three of us are very excited and want to provide as much information as we can. And unfortunately, we haven't got to your questions. So let me put up this resources page. Please email, call us, whatever you would like. I'd love to help you get some groups started. Any sort of final maybe questions or two within the last minute or so that we can address?
Sure, Derek, it's Sean. So I'm going to suggest, we could have done this as a 2-hour webinar, clearly, because there's so much interest. Yeah. I would say if you have your hand up and we haven't gotten to you, if you could type your question in the question box or comment, and that way we capture it and then we can respond to it. And I'm going to suggest that that I will send you these questions, Derek, and if you could just take some time to respond to them, we'll send the answers, your responses out to everybody. But just as an example of some of the questions, there was the question about fire danger, fire production risk. Someone else said nothing's been mentioned yet about rainwater harvesting as a technique. There's questions about whether there's partnerships to help contractors with vegetation plans. Mm-hmm. And what are the most impactful steps in policy, permitting, and planning that you recommend to more holistically address stormwater impacts? So those are some of the comments that came up. I'd be happy
to address those, and I could copy Elizabeth and Therese in case they have some suggestions for the fire reduction. There has been, the city of Bend has really done a great job. Wendy Edie, I believe, I think I remember her name correctly, is a great contact for that. Anyway, so not enough time, but we will definitely be happy to respond to any of these questions.
Great. And do you want to just put your resources up again before we end? Yeah, so there's your contact.
Our contact, and just to briefly, so these websites are places that we have, there's various types of resources available, or of course plugging our own there, the OSU one, but the Oregon Environmental Council, that's where you can download a LID manual for Western Oregon, and that same manual is also on the DEQ site and our OSU site. Washington Stormwater Center has a whole host of resources that's great, and of course EPA has a whole ton of them as well.
Okay. One of the things that occurs to me also, looking at the questions and comments, is that we really need to have another forum for having this continue. And so as you folks are filling out your survey, if you could just give us some ideas about how, is it another webinar? Is it a convening? What would be useful to you in learning more and being able to talk over with colleagues about what they're doing, what they're trying, what the issues that you might be facing in trying to get involved in low impact development in your watersheds. So we'd really like to get feedback from you all. And we realize this was just a bit of a taste in the topic, and we really feel like we hit a nerve in a good way. And I want to thank Therese and Elizabeth so much, and of course you, Derek, for taking the time to share your experiences and thoughts. And stay tuned. We'll be talking more.
All right, bye,
Absolutely.
everybody.
Thank you so much.
Bye, everyone.